Welcome to Your Mind is Trying to Kill You podcast. Join your host, Alexandros and co-host Vincent Byrne as they walk you through the deepest recesses of the mind and how it operates. They discuss all the reasons why our minds persistently get in the way of our evolution, growth, and our success. But crucially, they also teach you what you can do to change your destiny. And now, here's your host, Alexandros.
Well, hello and welcome to the 40th episode of the Your Mind is Trying to Kill You podcast. I am your host, Alexandros.
And I'm your co-host, Vincent Byrne.
And today, as per usual, we are arriving at our topic of our conversation just now, just like a minute ago, perhaps, as I'm talking with my friend Vincent here, because we've seen that, and this happens a lot, especially during times of conflict, outer conflict, and definitely inner conflict. We see a lot of people pointing fingers. We see a lot of people calling out the evil of this world on either side. See, it seems like people on the one side are pointing towards the evil on the other side, and people on the other side are pointing towards the evil on the other side. So everyone is pointing towards another kind of evil that definitely does not reside within themselves, right? So the question here begs to be, what is the question, my friend?
Well, I suppose it's simply, what is your capacity for darkness and evil? And is it something that's resident in us all, just waiting in the right conditions or wrong conditions to be unleashed?
That's right. And I think this is actually extremely important. That's an extremely important topic, because if we're not familiar with that topic, then we can be completely misled when it comes to our behavior, our own empathy in the world, our own ability to judge properly what the right or wrong approaches are in the world. Can I walk a path of righteousness if I don't know what it's like to walk the path of the opposite, right? Or I should say, a lot of people, because you know me, I've these kind of conversations I've had many times, and I challenge people's minds into, how I'm sure you've had these conversations too. Some weekend evening, having a pint and posing the question, would you ever kill anyone? And of course, most people that want to believe that they're righteous and they're good people, they would say, of course not, absolutely not. And I say, wow, okay, you wouldn't kill someone. Perhaps that's true. But what, I ask you, would you do to the person that harmed your child? You see, you can only judge these types of potential reactions by searching within yourself. And the fact that you wouldn't be a psychopath. Okay, good for you. That's what I say. Good for you. You wouldn't randomly go out there and chop someone's head off you are a good person. But there would be a circumstance in which you would be outraged and ready to do harm. And if you can find that circumstance within you, then I think that you are dangerous. You're a dangerous kind of person, because that means that you don't know, you're not aware of your own capacity for wrongdoing, for darkness. What do you think?
So how do you see it as dangerous? I mean, I would see it as we all have the capacity to do it. I mean, people are trained in armed forces to kill people. We're obviously the circumstances you talk about. If somebody threatens our children or us, there's a certain amount within us that we would react by doing it in, let's say, self-defense. But when you say it's dangerous not to recognize that ability in you, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is, if you don't know, you see, you just mentioned the armed forces, and I know several people who, because I am in that circle, even as a martial artist, of people who can actually do serious harm. And I can tell you this, and this is a guarantee: the more clear you are on how capable you might be of taking someone's life, or seriously hurting someone, the less likely it is that you would exercise that. It seems that the people who have that kind of capacity very well pronounced are the people that are the most empathetic, from what I can gather. Because it's as they say, a good person is a strong and dangerous person who chooses not to do harm. Someone who is submissive and unable to handle themselves is the weasel that will feel so suppressed and so, I don't know, a person who is submissive in life would generally feel within themselves that they are actually good people. See, because they choose to, like a pacifist type person, they choose to not engage in hurtful behavior. I think these people are the most dangerous people, because they, first of all, they don't have any understanding of their capacity for wrongdoing, because they have swallowed their own bullshit in terms of not choosing to be good. I don't know, this makes sense?
So are you saying that it's a little bit like the worm that turned? So if someone feels so weak and downtrodden, that they're the ones who are more likely to explode and do something harmful to other people in a kind of a random way. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes, partially that, but also the idea that there's all these people that point the finger at the world, you see. Because if you don't, within yourself, like, let's say that you're a weak human being, and by weak I mean you don't necessarily consider yourself someone who is dangerous, someone who could do damage, let's say physically.
Yeah, so my thinking on it is that I think there's definitely a capacity to harm someone, kill someone. That's obviously in us all. I mean, physically, it's in us all. I think the capacity to do it sort of out of the blue is the kind of worrying trend if someone has that capacity and that tendency as well. But one of the things that comes to mind for me, and I was writing about it during the week, is that experiment that was done, the Milgram experiment back in the 1960s, when the guys were testing the capacity of ordinary people to basically to electrocute people in another room, just under instruction of a guy in a white coat. And it was all based around the idea of why so many colluded and went along with the instructions that they were given by the German army, the Nazis, to kill so many people. And the experiment showed that people, if they're not connected with the other person that they're harming directly, and if they're being instructed by someone who they consider to be an authority figure, that it's like as if they put their normal human emotions and boundaries, leave it at the door, and they basically do it on they will do what they're told, even if it's very damaging or even fatal to somebody else. And that for me asks a lot of questions, because the people that were went through this experiment were what you might say were normal, reasonable, respectable people who probably in their normal day-to-day life were wouldn't harm anybody, but put them in a certain situation with an authority figure instructing them, and they have the capacity to kill people. And that answers a lot of questions, I suppose, as to why mass atrocities happen. And it also, for me, raises the question as to what is the trigger, what is the line that people actually cross when they actually do something like that. They go from, they go in the door and they are person A, and with a little bit of coaxing and goading, they become person B. And it's like as if they're able to detach themselves from the responsibility for doing it. I mean, that was the thing that was particularly characterizing of that experiment. It was like as if they couldn't see the person. They could hear someone screaming in the other room, but they were told to ignore it, and they went ahead anyway. And obviously a certain number of people stopped, but quite a number went all the way and supposedly delivered the fatal dose of electricity, essentially on the basis that they were told to do it, and it was like they didn't have any responsibility in the act at all. So
this is a general misconception, right? You just said, and it's very interesting. I'm glad you said that. How can someone step into a door as person A, and then on the other end, that someone becomes person B? And as far as I'm concerned, that's not what happens.
Okay.
And I'm going to connect that exactly to what I said in the very beginning a few minutes ago. The problem here is that the person doesn't know who they are, because they haven't really delved into what it is that it means to be them. So with a little bit of probing, you get all the garbage. You know what I mean? It's like, think of it this way: if you have one of those like little kiddie pools, and you have it outside, so it's been raining, and then there's all the mud that gets collected, right? And it's all sitting at the bottom, and seemingly the water's clear. But if someone takes a stick and starts like stirring up that water, what's gonna happen? All this mud's gonna come to the top.
Sure.
So it's the same thing that happens to those people. You see, because what happens? What happens if I don't know who I am? Because if I've spent zero time searching, soul searching, as they say, to attempting to find out what my capacities as a person are, because I've been preoccupied with bullshit all my life, Well, okay, not necessarily bullshit, but everyday survival, let's just put it this way, which is most people's preoccupation, but it's not just survival, but it's conditioning in general. I have to make sure I provide for my family, but I also have to make sure I show to the neighbor that I am a worthy citizen, that I'm cool enough. I got all the good stuff, too. I can do it as well. I can have good shit too, not just a neighbor. We talked about that. Why shouldn't I have a Mercedes? So with the everyday preoccupation of the average person into fulfilling that kind of role, they have almost zero time, energy, capacity for delving into that nightmarish hole that is the subconscious mind and our capacity for anything, for reaction, for obedience, for all this kind of stuff, which is what is it exactly? It's defaulting back to being a little child. This is what these people that participated in the Milgram Experiment, this is what they accessed. This is what they became. They became little children.
So it's a bit like they were back in school and the teacher was telling them to do something and they were just obeying. Is that what you mean?
That's right. Because especially, we've talked about the critical factor very, very many times. And the critical factor is a function of the conscious mind, which is there. It's not there during approximately the first 7 years of age. But it develops around that time. Now, without the critical factor, the child is liable to not having the capacity to discern truth from lies. And if the person who comes to the child is a person of authority or a person that the child genuinely likes, then they will, in either case, they will accept everything that they're told as the truth, and they will become obedient. No questions asked. So what happens to these people is that they default to that state. Because if anyone finds the right kind of psychological trigger to make us scattered enough, to make us scared enough, to make us confused enough, then it's open season to fuck with you. You see? Anyone can do anything they want with you. And this is some of the most interesting ways to manipulate that are out there. Of course, ways that politicians and cult leaders and people of the sort have used time and time again, with success, of course, because people are children. The masses are children. They, for all intents and purposes, they have never grown up. Why? Because we never step out of that. This society teaches us to never step out of that mental modality, which is mommy and daddy. Because the mommy and daddy will be replaced by something else called your government or your doctor, or you know what I mean? So it's the same thing, recycling over and over and over again.
So we're taught to obey authority, and that programming of obeying authority effectively is how we operate throughout our lives. It's just the nature of the authority may change from time to time as you change jobs, or if you're standing in front of a surgeon or whatever. It's always take what this guy is saying to you and don't question it, just go along with it, including if he tells you that you've got 6 months to live, obeying that as well.
That's right. And it's amazing how people, the majority of the times, especially what you just said, how many people have gone to their graves because they have simply accepted that they're gonna die and believe that they're gonna die. There's no other way. You see, belief is power, right? Belief is power, and unfortunately, with most people, the belief lies towards authority. Whether that's authority, that's the scientific medical authority, or the governmental political authority. I was talking to someone a few days ago because of course, the political environment here, as you know, is getting more tense by the minute. It's not like it's getting any better. It's actually getting worse. And the thing is that everyone sits back within their the knowledge of the authority that they trust, and based on that, they fight with one another. You see, they're like the people are fighting on behalf of authorities that they know nothing about. It's pure it's insanity. Or it's like being children. You know how children sometimes, you play with your friends as a child, and then one child says, my daddy is has got more money than your dad. And then you get upset. It's not true, and you kind of like, you get into an argument, you beat each other up because you're trying to prove that your daddy is better than the other person's daddy, right? So this is identifying with something that is outside of yourself. But since you have identified with it, you cannot separate it from yourself. So it's like, it's just one thing.
But is there also not one of the things that struck me about some of the legitimizing of extreme dangerous behavior is where you've got some guy saying that it's okay to go and shoot someone, and in the other hand he has a Bible or Quran or whatever book that he claims that he's doing this act in the name of this particular religious authority or whatever other authority they choose to do it under. It's like as if, I think similar to that Milgram experiment, is that if an authority figure tells me to do it, or if I do it in the name of supporting the authority figure, then it absolves me of personal responsibility. It's like as if I'm doing what I believe, as distinct from, what I believe someone else would want me to do, as distinct from, well, what do I actually want to do?
Right, which is making you what? What does this make you? A child is what we talked about.
Yeah.
Just a few minutes ago. It turns you into a child. So most people, I would say, what we would classify as the masses are children, are people that, if pushed just a little bit, and this is why authorities and politicians can manipulate the masses so beautifully and masterfully, because they know how to push the buttons, because the buttons are so easy to push, because they've been there, like, ready. It's like low-hanging fruit for forever.
Well, it's the program is there. You just have to tune in to the particular program and invoke some kind of trigger to have that program fired up in people. And usually, obviously, fear is a great one to fire up that particular program, where fear induces the need to listen to authority, because that's what we learned from our teacher when we were 4, and we were told that we had to do what she told us. And then if we didn't like it and we went home and told our parents that the teacher gave out to me today, the parents would say, well, do what your teacher said. So you were getting it from all angles that you needed to comply and fall into line with authorities. So that programming is there in us all, really.
The worst part about it is, you see, we're talking about this thing, and you know exactly what we're talking about, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and I know that my government is not out to help me, because my government doesn't really give a shit about me. It's just, it's a long, complex way of milking me and millions of other people, because that's what the government has become. And of course, because of the lack of critical factor on behalf of the masses, on behalf of the people, most people think that their government are elected and they're there to help them do the best they can. And I mean, this is a noble thought, of course. You would love to believe that this is the case, but look at the evidence, man. I mean, holy shit, for what, decades even. I'm not just saying look at go back 5 years or 10, but go back 100 years and see what your government has done for you. And then if you do that, you might recognize something that will be fairly disturbing. And that is, you are just a chicken, just a farm animal, as far as the government's concerned. Okay? So, but fear is the one thing. See, if the army knocked on my door and said blah 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 blah, we need you to do whatever, I would be scared too. I'd be scared, of course I would be. But I would know these people are full of shit. You know what I mean? But most people are inclined, just like with the Milgram Experiment, they're inclined to believe that that's the right thing to do, you see. And that is where the problem lies. Because we're not talking about people's ability to rebel against that authority. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people's ability to think critically and understand that whoever acts like that is not your friend. Is not out to help you.
Well, it's even without necessarily identifying whether they're friends or not, but just been in a position to question and evaluate everything from the perspective of, does this make sense? And am I doing the right thing by going along with it or not going along with it? And I think part of the difficulty is that, I suppose it's a little bit like, walking into your house. You're comfortable in your house, so you walk confidently around it, especially, if you come in after the day or whatever, you let yourself in and you walk confidently around it, and you know it and you know it well, and you will do the same in every house that you go into that you know well and that you're welcome in. But if you go into a stranger's house, you're not likely to do that. You will be, I suppose, uncomfortable until such time as you're made feel comfortable. And it's like as if we're made, these people in authority, whether they're doctors, whether they're people in government, whoever, they attempt to make us feel comfortable with accepting that they're here for us and that they are going to look out for us and they're going to do the right thing for us. And occasionally they might ask us to do something which might be painful, but that's only because they're real and authentic and genuine people, but that effectively we trust them. And then because we do, we don't question anything they have to say. And the irony of it is that when the guy who does that, whether he's the leader or, senior minister or whatever it might be, says all that and we go along with it, and then we find out a few years later that the guy's been on the take from, a pharmaceutical company or from whatever, and he's shamed. We kind of go, oh, we knew that about him all along. How could you believe him? Sure, we knew he was a He was a chancer and a robber and a fraud. And yet, when he was in there and he was coming on all earnest, doing his television address or whatever he did, we all accepted it and swallowed it because he was the person in authority and one of the people that we had come to trust. And as you say, the evidence is there over and over and over again that these people in authority, it's not that they're all bad, but the idea that they wear the uniform or they have the badge or they have the letters after their name does not confer on them the automatic right for you or for them to expect you to just accept what they have to say. And yet we do that automatically. And I suppose what we're saying is what you need to be is that if you were ever in the Milgram experiment type situation, you need to have sufficient capacity to say, hang on a second, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to step away from this. And regardless of what you were urged to do by that person in authority, you still said, no, this doesn't feel right. I don't care who you are. I might respect that you're suggesting something else, but I'm taking my own responsibility and I'm going to do something different to what you say.
But what does it take to do that? It takes self-understanding. It takes self-knowledge. It takes the very rudimentary knowledge of your sovereignty as a human being. How many people do you think have that? Or how many people would they have that developed in a society that teaches? I mean, the Milgram Experiment is ridiculously crazy because these people didn't even it's not like someone put a gun to their heads, you know what I mean? This is the crazy part about it. They were like, it's part of the whatever, it's part of the study. If these people get it wrong, you keep on upping the electricity dose with which they were being electrocuted, right? So that's what you knew. But it's not like anyone forced you to do that, and yet nobody said, got up and was like, "Fuck you, this is bullshit," and walked out, right? I mean, it does, and of course they thought it was real. It wasn't real, but it doesn't matter because for all intents and purposes, it was real. It was real for these people, and these people didn't stop. See, this is why we're talking about, in the beginning, we talked about the ability to be righteous. Or, because do you think that a person who was trained to be an assassin, ironically speaking now, someone who could be an assassin was in that kind of capacity, do you think they would continue with the Milgram experiment? Or do you think they would get up and punch the guy in the face and leave? I think that, I mean, of course, it all depends on your all ethical disposition. I suppose if you don't give a shit, yeah. But there is a certain idea of morals that doesn't even come from religion. It doesn't even come from society. It just comes from within. And people, all they have to do is just connect with the universal law, if you will. What's the universal law? I don't know. They say that, even, to give an example, even a predator like like a lion or something, like it wouldn't interrupt a gazelle from drinking water, to kill it and eat. Because somehow that would be an unfair advantage or whatever. I guess what I'm trying to say here is you do need to have an understanding of who you are and what your depth is when it comes to how far you could go in life, and what your own understanding of your purpose in life is. Like my ancestors, the Greeks, very, very pronounced understanding of the fact that you just never live on your knees. You're not. This isn't life. you never bow down. And I'm not saying that that's what everybody should do, but it is important to recognize what your allegiance is with any specific philosophy when it comes to who you are and who you will be when X happens. Because, like I said in the beginning, you wouldn't kill someone. Perhaps that's true. But what would you do to the person who killed your kid?
Yeah.
Right? So it is important. And I'm not suggesting that either. If you could just be the person to forgive your kid's killer, good for you. I'm not suggesting that either or is desirable. I'm just saying it is important that you know where you stand. It is important that you know who you are when it comes to this or that. For when it comes to anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, what strikes me about this is that in order to be reasonably confident of being able to decide for yourself what you're going to do in any situation, whether it be a Milgram experiment or any other extreme scenario, you kind of, as well as knowing who you are, you need to be well practiced in the process of critically evaluating things like incidents, situations that come up on a day-to-day basis. You need to be, it's almost like you need to proactively step in front of your subconscious mind and the automatic response and go, hold on a minute, I need to think this through and I need to decide whether this, whether buying an ice cream is right for me or not, or whatever. But you need to be used to the practice of setting aside your automated programming, because as we said, the programming to obey authority is there and has been developed in us all. So the only way that we're going to have any kind of sense of being able to set it aside when we're put on the spot like that Milgram experiment is to know that you've practiced that exercise or that process on a pretty regular basis prior to that. And that you are able to do some independent thinking rather than just going with the flow or going with what your programming suggests that you do.
Exactly. So once again, that suggests that it is not a trivial task to connect or start connecting, if you haven't, to the depths of your capacity, your soul, if you will. That's easy to do. I have been doing that for many years, just as an exercise, just bringing up hypotheticals. Like if that happened, what would I do?
So it's almost like a version of you're planning for going into an interview and you're saying, what if he asks me that question? What would I say? Or what if he reacts this way? What would I say? You're kind of rehearsing it. And while you may not give those answers exactly, the fact that you have gone through the process means you're more likely to be able to handle them than you would be if you were caught like a rabbit in the headlights with the situation.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But that's the more, this is a soft version of something like that, because we're talking about, in many cases, life driving, life depending decisions that you might have to make.
Sure.
And with practices, going back to the shamanism and shamanic practices, ayahuasca or something like that, or just meditating. But I'm talking about, I'm referring to ayahuasca or practices like that, because it intensifies, it just brings up certain things so much easier, so much faster. It's so much faster to get to things that it might otherwise take you, years to get to. So,
but that even that, I mean, whatever method you might use, it has the prerequisite that you have made a decision to explore, to inquire into yourself and what lies beneath, and not just to know about what you would do if you were put in one of those life or death situations, but essentially to explore what would go on in many situations. What is your programming? What are your biases? What are the things that are buried? I mean, that requires a particular decision to get involved in that. And I think when we talk about many people, let's say in the Milgram experiment, reverting to being children, that's predominantly because not many people make a decision to go and do that inquiry and do that work.
that's right. Because imagine if the majority of these people that participated had done any kind of soul searching and knew where they stand. You have to know what kind of system governs your spirit, your psyche, your ability to respond to life. You have to know that. You have to be aware of that. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite and you are an asshole, because it's like the people who just look at me, just give me a look when I tell them that I killed my own turkeys or roosters or whatever, as if I'm like really cruel, doing that, and yet they think that they're all good. They feel good about themselves in the sense that they don't partake in that kind of horrible and almost, one might say, criminal activity, violence, and they go to the supermarket and they just get it in a package, right? But I mean, anyone who thinks like that is majorly delusional, because it's actually this is what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to know who you are. If I raise a rooster and then I have to take that animal out, that is an extremely intimate act. And within that act, I take responsibility. And that's the difference between me and the average schmo who goes to the supermarket and then, goes back to the children and pray before dinner and feel righteous. And but that to me is hypocrisy, you see, because if you can't take responsibility for your life, then you will never know what it takes to be out there and do what you need to do. And these are the people who usually default into being children when the shit hits the fan. And one way or the other, it always happens. It will always happen to someone's life, whether or not it's a major global event, as it is with something that we're facing currently, or if it's just, whatever, a personal event, circumstances, something the shit hits the fan at some point with everyone's life, right? And how do you respond to that? Are you equipped? And when I say you're equipped, are you equipped psychologically? Are you equipped mentally, emotionally to deal with that? Because if you're not, then you will inevitably lose your shit and cause a lot of damage to a lot of people around you and yourself. And just to give you a more graphic example, it's as if you have a rookie doctor and that hasn't done any whatever surgeries. It's the first time, and then someone brings roll in someone who had a mutilated limb or whatever, and that doctor loses their shit. It's like, oh my god, oh my god. Now, in that moment, what kind of help can this person be? Or would you want a person like that?
No,
operating on you,
wheel him out, wheel him out.
you know. I'd be slapping him with the other, non-severed limb. I'd be like, get your shit together, man. Holy shit. Do what you're told. Do what you're supposed to do. So it's not just about, it goes much deeper than obedience here. Of course, obedience is what we see on the surface. But obedience is only the result of a life that has not been developed, of a spirit that has not been developed, of almost an unconscious human being, someone who has lived their life on default. It's someone who has lived their lives on autopilot, which is what we talk about on every episode in order to avoid. Because living on autopilot means that you are an automaton, right? We talked about automatons last week. It is time, and I guess you know what to say. If you don't do what's necessary to shape your own life, life will present you the circumstances in which you will have to. So now, I mean, you see people talk about Milgram Experiment, man. Fuck Milgram Experiment. Look what's happening around us. Yeah, people are going and they are snitching on their neighbor who has their little business open. I mean, how Orwellian is that? And they think they're actually doing, they feel justified in that act. They feel that, oh, I did what's right. Because daddy and mommy said I should do that, because it's not right. How dare you do what mommy and daddy said you shouldn't do? How dare you? Why? It's not right. You're not supposed to do what daddy said you shouldn't do. And you're going to make Jesus cry too.
It's like some of the reporting you hear on the from the time of the SS occupation, or the Stasi, or the various secret police organizations in typically more communist kind of states, that this was the kind of infrastructure that they built up to have the citizens reporting to them on each other in order to keep the control there. And here you see it going on in plain sight in the land of capitalism.
Absolutely. Do you think? That's why I think that what's happening right now is actually a blessing. It's a blessing because it really, if anything, it's showing us the state of affairs within us, the state of our own inner consciousness. People being like that, people acting like children. And by the way, what do you think why did Hitler rely on the Hitler Youth so much? Right? Motherfucker was smart. He wasn't stupid. Because he knew the children are the best allies you can have when it comes to obedience. And those children, if they believe in you, if they believe that you are really their daddy, they will go up against their own parents. And they did. They would snitch on their parents, with risking them being executed. I mean, what the fuck? Do you understand how fucked up that is? It's like, what is giving you a glimpse of who you are as a human being? At that moment, you are just a trained dog, man. You are a trained dog, trained to kill, trained to, search and retrieve, or whatever. You're a dog. You're not a human being. And unfortunately, most people are like that. So, we see it. Wow, I wonder where this is going to go. Because what's going on right now is going to be a huge global Milgram experiment, I think. I predict. I hope I'm wrong. Or even the Stanford prison experiment, because it's of a similar nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you take a group of people that are from the same kind of people. You know, you take me and you make me the guard and you the prisoner. And then I start assuming my identity as a guard and beat the shit out of you for no reason at all. Because I'm a guard. That's my job. You see? It's my job to make you obedient. You're supposed to do what I tell you because that's my identity. So it's you know, in concluding with this, you know, because we don't want to beat a dead horse. It's extremely important to ask yourself, who am I? Or as I ask myself, who the fuck am I? You know? And, you know, Lord knows I have done very many things to push myself towards either acting in ways I never thought I would, or exploring the possibility of acting in ways I never thought I would, mentally and emotionally. And let me tell you something, my brother. I have found that in every single case, if I'm pushed out of my boundaries, I learn something about myself. And what I can say almost with 100% certainty is that every time that this happened, I learned that I was living a lie before. I thought that was, you know, I thought that was true, that what I was taught, it was a true thing, you know. And then I realized, of course, how do you learn? How do you learn whether or not something that society taught you to be is true or not? You have to find yourself outside of that boundary somehow. You know, if you can make it be imaginary in your imagination, good for you. Because then, I mean, you don't have to actually risk, you know, real damage. But either way, by stepping outside of my own boundaries, I found out that my life, I mean, from where I started, holy shit, my life had been filled with lies and bullshit that I obeyed to for several years because I thought that was you know, it was the right thing to do, in the very similar fashion that the people in the Milgram Experiment did. How many things, and this is the moral of the story, how many things that you do on a daily basis do you do based on your conditioning, which is to say, based on what you've been taught? You should do what you've been taught is right, what you've been taught is wrong. Instead of you having your own personal experience in the matter.
I think the other thing which takes up on the theme of last week about the automaton concept is how many things do you do during the day where you stop and ask, is this the right thing to do? And it may be something very simple, but where you stop and ask, as distinct from do subconsciously, automatically, without thinking. Because if you were to, the more you stop and ask, the more conscious, the more aware you'll be. And the more aware you are, the better you are able to handle some of these big decisions that you might be asked to answer or to decide upon when they're put in front of you. I think if we're used to behaving like automatons and just doing things by rote, we're pretty much slam dunk candidates to do exactly the same as most of those people in that experiment did and electrocute the shit out of the people that were supposedly in the other side of the room. So I think we said it before, the way you find yourself, the way that you connect with yourself as an individual is to be curious, question things, and find the problems to, instead of avoiding problems, which is what we tend to do, and staying within our comfort zone, find the problems and face up to the challenges and look to see if you can solve them. Because that's not an ordinary life to do that. And I think the more you do it and the more you break the pattern of automatic behaviour, the more interesting a life you're going to have.
Absolutely. Not just interesting, but fulfilling. And after all, isn't that why we're here?
Absolutely. So, what's your final word?
My final word is that you have this amazing piece of art behind you. And
you noticed?
I did. It's awesome.
From the US of A during the week. What's the story behind it? I hear you might know who did it.
I have a faint idea. But do I really? You see? Because whoever did that cannot take credit for the entire piece. Because, once again, my art is a tool for me to extract these pieces of information that come through me. And I learn a lot from creating these pieces because they come through me. It's almost entirely channeled, one might say. So this actually is my front yard. I don't know if you knew that.
I suspected it was.
Yeah, and it was a dream. It was a dream that I saw that exact situation. It was actually very close to what it looks like now because we just got our first snow here.
Well, actually, I'm going to go back so as you can see the whole thing.
Yeah. So I saw this giant moon and the reflection of it on the pond. And there was a person sitting by the side of the pond. And that person to me was, one might call her a witch or some sort of a learned person in the ways of witchcraft or esotericism or alchemy. And this is about, as far as I'm concerned, and of course the moon is all about emotion. The moon and the water, right? Moon's all about emotions and dealing with your emotions, your dark emotions, and water even more so. So it's amazing to me that you chose this piece because it shows that your proclivity is that kind of research, inner search, for which I salute you. That's a noble quest. Not for the faint of heart, though.
I was told by an astrologer that I occasionally go to that I had a propensity to investigate the dark side, the dark underbelly of life.
Well, this is all about that. So it's about your dreams. It's about hidden subconscious desires or subconscious programs that you need to explore and eradicate or enhance, depending on whether they serve you or not. And it's about you becoming that warlock, that alchemist. That person ultimately is you over there by the side of the pond and is looking in what? Reflection. So for all intents and purposes, it's self-reflection. It's a reflection of your subconscious mind. So it's awesome. I love to see it. It looks great. It looks great. Good for you. I would be happy to know that if you take down any notes on how you feel on any given day, and if you get any insights just by looking at this, meditating with it, and that will be very interesting to hear.
Okay, I'll do that.
Perfect. So 100% subconscious exploration with today's topic. The final thoughts is do not be a child. Don't be a child in the way that you live your life.
Don't be an obedient child. Be a curious child if you're going to be a child at all.
That's right. Yeah, and when I mean right, I meant it in the way of obedience.
Yeah.
Don't accept anything without questioning it. Anything, no matter where it comes from, including this source, of course.
Absolutely.
And be sure that this world, this life, is going to get to test you, perhaps very soon, as to your capacity, your own capacity of committing acts that were unthinkable to you prior to getting through these circumstances. That's why it is so much more important to allow yourself to step there, to get there before you get there. Or as in the way that the esoteric sciences and meditation practices and all this kind of work goes, it's all about dying before you die so that you can be prepared. So prepare yourself for who you are and who you will be when things switch from what you think they are to what they really are. So here it is, my friend. And as we always say, until next week.
Let's be careful out there.
And don't let your mind kill you.
Thanks for listening to Your Mind is Trying to Kill You with Alexandros Megas and Vincent Byrne. If you like our show and want to make sure that you don't miss an episode, then we would love if you would subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And you'd be doing us a big favor if you would support us by leaving a review as well. It would also be great if you would take a screenshot of this episode on your smartphone and share it on social media. So join us next Wednesday when we talk more about mind hacking and taking back control of your life. Until then, have a great week.